Alright Carnivore fans, welcome back. It is time for another top 5 video. This week we're doing top 5 barn finds. Walter, why top 5 barn finds?
Well, I think barn finds are really interesting. You know, there have been some amazing vehicles that have been pulled out of barns and warehouses and garages, and yeah, some of these cars just kind of seem like a time capsule where, you know, these cars were thought to be lost. A lot of these cars tend to be very high-end cars, and now they've been rediscovered.
Yeah, absolutely, and some really interesting stories about how they were discovered as well. I had a lot of fun doing research for this one, some really interesting stories. So why don't you kick us off? What do you have first?
So the first car I have is a DB4, an Aston Martin DB4. There were over 1,000 of these made with a Superleggera body. 5 decades later, the car is pulled from Massachusetts woods. Tell me what you think of this, Miles.
Wow, that's kind of a crazy picture. It really almost blends in with the natural landscape.
Yeah, and the car was sold at auction. So a restored example of this would go for about $750,000. This car at auction sold for $340,000.
Wow, that's crazy. Wow, it's a very cool story.
So what do you have, Miles?
So up first, I don't actually have one car, I have 4 cars. This was a story from about 7 years ago. 4 almost brand new, never before driven 1980s classics, 350 horsepower Ford RS200, which, if you're not familiar, it's an all-wheel drive road-going Group B rally car. Only had 1,000 miles on it. There were 2 matching first-generation BMW E30 M3s. One had 57 miles on the clock, the other had 37 miles on the clock. So these were, I mean, essentially delivery mileage on these 2. And the 4th car was a 230 horsepower Mercedes 190e Evolution 2, which was Mercedes' attempt to compete with BMW and the M3. So kind of a crazy story and a great purchase for him.
How about a 1962 Ferrari GTO? This car was identified as chassis number 3589. It was left outside to rot for almost 15 years after its short 2-year competition run. Kids used to slide down the hood, Miles. Can you believe that?
Wow, crazy.
And I recently asked a 250 GT owner if I could slide down his hood, and he looked at me and just stared at me.
Yeah, I think he was considering punching you in the face.
Since retired race cars were considered almost disposable back in those days, its owner, Tom O'Connor, decided to donate it to the Victoria High School in Texas. But the cost of keeping it was too much for their education budget, so they accepted a sealed bid offer of $6,500 in 1972 from Mr. Corton, and in today's money, Miles, that's probably worth about 38 grand. Many people tried to convince Mr. Corton to sell it to them during that time, as he made no attempts to hide it from plain view on his property. He finally did sell it in 1986 to a gentleman, and a few years later it was passed on to a Swiss family who had it restored in time for the 1990 Concours d'Elegance in Pebble Beach.
Yeah, it's a story with a happy ending. I'm glad it was finally restored.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a gorgeous car.
All right, Walter, you're familiar with the Jaguar XJ220, I assume?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Yeah, really impressive modern production sports car from back in the early 90s. Only 271 of them were actually ever produced, but the car had 0 to 60 time of 3.5 seconds, top speed of 212 mile per hour, really impressive statistics. Well, one of these cars, the car in question today, was a particularly stunning model. It was painted in a Le Mans blue, and it ended up abandoned on the edge of the Qatari desert in 2010 with only 560 miles on the clock. Walter, take a look at this picture.
Wow.
Yeah,
Jeez.
It's kind of sad to see a car like that in that condition. Not a lot is really known about the car, who owned it, or how it ended up abandoned. This remains kind of an unceremonious end for a real modern classic supercar.
Miles, let's go out there and retrieve it.
I'm telling you, we just need a truck and we'll drive out and rescue these cars. What do you got next, Walter?
Miles, you probably enjoy French bread. What are some of the characteristics that categorize a good French bread?
Are we doing a cooking show now, Walter?
Just answer the question.
All right, fine. I don't know, I guess a fluffy interior and maybe a really nice crusty exterior?
Well, you're going to like this crusty vehicle.
Okay.
How about this, Miles? This is the before and after.
Well, that can't be true, Walter. There's got to be more to the car before.
Well, you're right. This is the real picture of the car. This is one of the many cars that were pulled out of the Baillon estate. The granddaughter contacted several auction companies, and there were some very significant cars pulled out. One of them was a Ferrari California, and it was actually in great condition. This car wasn't in such great condition, though. This car was actually ordered by Socek, who is a coach builder. Only 29 were actually built between 1948 and 1952. And this car was actually sold for $1.6 million.
Wow, it's crazy. So my next car, Walter, actually isn't a car, it's a submarine. And as you know, I'm a huge James Bond fan, particularly of the Roger Moore era films. Roger Moore just passed away recently, which is very sad. But one of his more popular movies was A Spy Who Loved Me, and I'm sure you'll remember that great scene of the Lotus Esprit driving into the ocean and turning into a submarine. For the production of that movie, they actually built a submarine version of the car. Essentially, it was just an Esprit shell with some motors and other gizmos in it. It wasn't an actual road-going car. And for the promotion of the movie in the 1970s, they brought the car, Submarine, to the US, toured it around. And at the end of that promotional tour, it somehow ended up in a storage unit in Long Island. No one's really quite sure how or why. The rent was paid up for 10 years. And when the lease expired, the owners of the storage facility couldn't find anyone to come forward and claim it. So they sold the contents in a blind sale for $100. So someone ended up owning this submarine car, toured around a little bit, it was fully restored. And then finally in 2013, it was sold to potential James Bond villain Elon Musk. I think he definitely could be a Bond villain. He apparently is a big fan of the movie, so he now has it in his personal collection. So a good ending for a very famous car.
So I chose another car from the Bayonne estate, which was in France. And this also is another Talbot Lago. And Miles, when I was doing research on these vehicles, I really didn't want to choose two vehicles from the same estate or even the same manufacturer. But when I saw this vehicle, I really just had to include it. And there are two reasons why. One of the reasons why is because the vehicle looked as clean on the inside as my wife keeps her car.
Nice.
And then the other reason is the rear seat. Miles, take a look at this picture of the rear seat.
Wow, that looks like someone just put a sofa in the back of a car.
Yeah, I just think it looks spectacular. This is a Talbot Lago T26 fastback. And I mean, I just think it's just, one of those very luxurious cars, also bodied by Socek. So it's just absolutely just an amazing car, I think.
Yeah, great pick.
So what do you have, Miles?
I'm talking about Stamatis Kokatis, who was a huge pop star in Greece in the 1960s and 70s and got the nickname the Greek Elvis, famous for his long hair and his longer sideburns. He had a lot of fans. One fan in particular gave him a brand new 1969 Lamborghini Miura. That fan's name was Aristotle Onassis. And Stamatis was a very keen rally driver. He drove the car very aggressively, so aggressively, in fact, that he blew the engine. And so the car was parked up in the underground parking lot of the Athens Hilton Hotel. The engine was sent back to Lamborghini to be repaired, but for some reason, the car was just left there for 30 years. The engine was never returned. And it wasn't until the Olympics returned to Greece in 2003 and the hotel was undergoing major renovation that the car was rediscovered and reunited with its original engine, sent to auction. It reached $483,000, but not enough to meet the reserve, so it went unsold. So not sure where it is now, but definitely an interesting backstory.
All right, for my next car, it's not one, but two. It's actually, I'm calling it the twins. How about two 1987 Buick Grand Nationals? These cars were found by a buyer out in Oklahoma. Amazing thing about these is that one car has only 592 miles on it, and the other car has a whopping 807 miles.
Wow. So
they're literally, unused, and there's, no rust. They're just dirty. There's a sagging headliner, but aside from that, the cars look to be in perfect condition. Yeah, the good thing is that the owner is keeping them together. He's not going to separate them too, which is kind of cool. And another thing is the VIN numbers are sequential.
So Walter, does it count as a barn find if the car in question is buried in someone's backyard?
Buried?
In 1978, a couple of kids were playing in the backyard of a Los Angeles home, and they were digging in the dirt when they hit metal. It turned out to be a 1974 Ferrari Dino 246 GTS. Now, the car had been reported stolen a couple of years earlier, and the police suspected this was part of some kind of elaborate insurance scam. And whoever had buried the car had obviously intended to come back and uncover it later, because they wrapped some areas in plastic and stuck some towels in some of the intakes and things like that. But unfortunately, they hadn't done a very good job and the car was not in great condition. But since the insurance company had already paid out, the insurance company took possession of the car and it is back on the road. Here's a picture of it now. It's a really beautiful car in that green color.
All right, so that concludes top 5 barn finds for Carnivore. And Miles, it was a real fun segment.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed doing the research for this one. It was fun.
Yeah, I did too. So thanks again for watching, and please subscribe to us, provide comments. We really like your comments, and keep watching us. Thanks again.
See you next time, guys. So Walter, I know you're a big fan of Elvis Presley, but are you... sorry, start again.
Actually, I'm not.
I know, that's the truth. All right.